Let's talk a little bass fishing.
Okay.
So, David, you fished Truman for a lot of years. What is the shindig that everyone needs to know on March bass fishing on Truman?
Man, it's really pretty simple. It really is. Jerk bait. You know, I'm biased. I'm gonna throw my jerk bait. So Dave's Custom Baits Black Market 110. I myself haven't really caught a lot of fish on Truman throwing a wiggle wart style bait like my Black Market Rock Warrior. And the simple fact is that when I fish that bait, I like to parallel a bank. I like for the bait to stay in contact. I like the boat to sit in about 8 foot of water, and I'm quartering that bank, paralleling but still quartering, because when a bait lands, I want it to land almost at the water line, and I'll rod tip up it, and I'll bring it for the first 3 or 4 cranks, and then rod tip down, and then it's always in contact with the bottom, rooting. Well, anyone who's fished here knows there's a handful of places on this lake where you can actually do that and not have trees, stumps, blah, blah, blah. You know, and you have to weave in and out of them or whatever. So I never really chose to fish that way. Now throwing a jerk bait, or throwing a spinner bait, or throwing a jig on the bank and fishing some of those swing banks. And whenever I say swing banks, I'm talking about in creeks. You'll have a creek channel, a swing on, swing off. You know, it's typically the first places you want to look. If they're really hard on the channel swings, then you can fish the main part of it. And that's typically your wintering areas, those main hard channel swings where it stays on it. You know, a lot of them are bluff banks and things like that. But not to say that wiggle wart won't work, because in places down, let's say, Turpin, Vance Branch, you know, places like that. There's places in the Holes Creek that you can get on banks and be able to fish them. So it's really dependent upon your style. Me, I like I think the very biggest fish of the lake are going to bite in March. The very biggest bass. And March 15th, if you have a full moon that falls somewhere around March 15th, if I wanted to catch the biggest bass on Truman that I can catch, I'm fishing that section. I'm fishing the 14th through the 17th, whatever, if you've got a full moon falling right there, because they'll get, those big ones come up shallow. And I know a lot of people have talked about this over the years. I've seen it, I've caught them, I've seen the unicorn. A good friend of mine was with me, and he caught his personal best years ago and weighed 9.2. The tail was bloody. It was March 13th or 16th, one of the two. That fish was up there spawning. I know it was. I know where it was. I know how it was positioned. And those big ones are big ones for a reason. They come up, they get it done early, and then they get off the bank. The biggest bass, I believe, at Truman, the biggest bass spend most of their life suspended. They don't get big by being stupid, you know. So when they come to the bank, you can catch them. So like I said, a jerk bait, a big spinner bait, and whenever I throw a big spinner bait, I like to throw a 1 ounce model. I like great big blades. I'm a willow leaf guy rather than a hubcap guy. So I'll throw an 8 and a 5 or a 7 and a 4 and a half willow leaves. And then my jig is pretty standard. I mean, it's a 1/2 ounce black and blue jig with a blue sapphire super speed crawl on it. And typically, when I'm throwing these colored baits, you know, I'm fishing on the upper ends. I'm fishing dirtier water because that warms first, and those big ones get up in that warm water. They need the sunlight, they need the warmth for the eggs and all the maturation that the eggs go through before it's time to spawn. So it's a bit of biology and just being on the water and knowing when and where and what to look for.
Yeah.
You know, that's
Biggest bass I ever caught on Truman was in March. On a spinnerbait with a hubcap.
Yeah.
Slow, slow, slow.
Yep.
It was just a little over 7.
Wow. Real shallow like that?
Yeah, right up against it.
Yeah.
Well, it was like a short bluff,
Mhm.
but it was like bounced it off the short bluff.
Mhm.
You know, it barely got off of it before.
Yeah.
And those swings, and whenever I talk about those creek channel swings, those the best swings that I like to fish, and I'll throw my jerkbait right next to these. If you have a cedar tree on a gravel flat, and that creek channel has come in and cut that flat, and as it leaves, each one of those cedar trees that are out there on that roll-off, that's a staging area for those great big ones to get in those cedar trees. Years ago, when the cedar trees had more limbs to them, they used them better. Now, a lot of our cedar trees look like toothpicks, but they'll get in those cedar trees and they'll suspend high in them and sun themselves. And man, it's unbelievable.
Mm.
It really is. So I know that March is a great month. I mean, it's a great month for all the
Every
species.
time.
I mean, they like to bite. And if you like to catch them, then I'd be fishing in March.
Mm.
And you know that lots of times whenever we're talking about wind, bass, and I've always said this, if you'll go to where the wind ends, so if it's blowing out of the south and it's blowing right up in a northern cove and it blows right in the back end of it, it's going to have shad piled up and there's going to be bass back there, and you just go to where the wind ends and you can catch them.
Yeah. So you've talked about in the past, you know, you did an article about it, like your favorite arms to fish in the fall,
Yeah.
Grand, Palmy. Do you have any particular favorites for this time of year in March? I know you talked about getting in that dirty water.
Yeah, and those have changed. Those have changed just because of the age of the lake. If you'd asked me that 15 years ago, I'm an Osceola guy.
Yeah.
I'm an Osceola guy. I mean, you could get into some of those creeks. It typically had to be 708 to 709 to get in the creeks because of the siltation and everything, but you could get in some of those creeks up there and just absolutely have amazing days. Well, in the last 15 years, bad stuff has happened.
Most of your cedars are gone on those things
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Big Muddy used to
Oh.
hold fish all spring long. A lot of them trees are broke off. Wrights Creek most of them are broke off at water level now. You
That's
know.
sad. That Wrights Creek used to be
Yeah.
such a good creek.
Yeah, I
It's
did
going to
catch.
be different now
I
this
did
year.
catch some really good crappie in there
Mm.
Sunday though. So that was one day I did crappie fish Truman. That's where I was at, and they're just out cruising around suspended. You know, we caught fish from 5 foot down to 15 foot down. They was just cruising all over in there looking for food.
Yeah,
But
absolutely. But Upper Grand,
Yeah.
I've transitioned. You know, it's
Mhm.
Upper Grand, and heck, a long time ago, you could still get up, you know, in the Big Tebow, you know, from Barker Creek on up, you know, and fish it up to Sea Highway, and you know, now it's kind of sketchy being able to navigate that, especially at some of the lake levels that we've seen.
Mhm.
And, I mean,
Yeah, all last year for the most part.
Yeah.
You know, but there's a fine line because like last year it was so low that you
Yeah.
could actually, you know, run a lot of places because you see
Oh,
everything.
yeah.
you can see it.
yeah.
But then you get that happy medium. Right now is that happy medium. A lot of people say, "Oh, normal pool,
Uh-uh.
normal."
No,
That's just normal
so
pool
far.
for the lake. That's the
That's-
worst.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
if it's 704, you can pretty near see everything.
Yeah.
706 to 707 and 3/4.
Yep.
Terrible.
Yep. 709, you're pretty well good.
Yeah.
704, you can see everything.
Yeah.
Anything between there is rough.
Mm.
Is real rough.
Especially if you haven't, I mean, we fished it for years. I mean, heck, I've been to every arm that there is to the end of it and back, and I can run it blindfolded. I mean, but for the normal person that comes here and is like, oh, okay, yeah, check the lake level, it's 706, 25, you know, it's just a little bit of a normal pool, everything's fine.
I wish they wouldn't call it normal pool.
Mhm.
I don't know why. There's got to be a better name for it.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing normal about
No.
it. That's like the perfect level to tear stuff up.
Mm.
And even at 704, or like last year, it was as low as we'd seen in a long time.
Yeah.
So even us guys that's been on it for 20 plus years, we hit stuff that we didn't even know was there because it hadn't been down that far.
Yeah.
When does the square bill bite start picking up for you?
I like to start throwing my large balsa bait when the water temperature flirts with 56 to 58.
Mm.
Because, like I said, those fish want to get shallow. Those big ones want to get shallow, and I'm not fishing it as aggressive as I normally do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and wind is also the other thing. I really like to fish it in the wind early in the year because those fish are up there. They're up there for one reason, and that's to feed. You get that big bait up there, and you retrieving it. I'm not slow rolling it, but I'm not fishing it like it's July either.
Mhm.
So it's somewhere in between, and just experiment. I mean, you've got to let the fish tell you what they want. If you're not getting bit, speed it up. If you're not getting bit, slow it down. If you're not getting bit, pick something else up.
Mhm.
But typically, that's what I like to do. I mean, and those big bluegill that will get up, and people don't realize that they get there when they get there. You know, so just think you've been eating chicken all year and all winter long, and then all of a sudden somebody serves you up something different. They're like, oh man, I'm tired of shad. How about that bluegill right there?
Yeah.
My favorite time to throw a square bill is about the end of April when the current's running at the cut through.
Look out!
Yeah.
You got some current pulling through the cut through, you go up over to the square bill, just power pull down, let her.
That's a fact.
I had a guy send me a 5.5 inch swim bait. It's one of the, I don't know how it's. He makes those giant ones.
Oh, yeah.
He made a smaller one. It's a bluegill pattern that it'll swim like a crankbait, but you can also kind of wake it a little bit
Yeah.
or just below the surface. I'm kind of
Is
curious.
it one or two joints?
It's 2 jointed.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I was testing it out in my lake this weekend, and it had some pretty nice action
Yeah.
to it. So,
those are awesome baits.
talking about the bluegill kind of makes me think that might be something kind of interesting.
Absolutely.
So,